1 minute ago, the silence finally broke. Billy Crystal, a man known for his warmth, restraint, and decades-long loyalty to his inner circle, spoke publicly for the first time since the devastating news surrounding Rob Reiner's death began to ripple through Hollywood. It was not a press conference. It was not a polished statement drafted by publicists. It was a brief, emotionally charged acknowledgement that instantly sent shockwaves through an industry already struggling to process what it had lost. For years, Billy Crystal and Rob Reiner were more than collaborators. They were architects of a cultural moment, bonded by shared creative instincts, shared laughter, and a shared understanding of how fragile success truly is. From the outside, their friendship looked effortless, almost immune to the darker undercurrents of Hollywood. That illusion shattered the moment Crystal's voice cracked on camera, his words measured but heavy, as if each sentence had to fight its way out. "I never thought I would be speaking about Rob in the past tense," he said quietly. That single line carried more weight than any headline screaming for clicks. Because in Hollywood, silence often speaks louder than scandal, and when someone like Billy Crystal finally chooses to speak, it means the ground underneath has shifted. What stunned people was not just that he spoke, but how he spoke. There was no attempt to redirect attention. No softening language. No vague condolences. Instead, Crystal acknowledged the confusion, the disbelief, and the unanswered questions swirling around Reiner's death. He did not speculate. He did not accuse. But he did not pretend this was a simple loss either. His tone suggested something deeper, something unresolved, something that would not neatly fade into memory. Hollywood insiders immediately took notice. When a figure as respected and cautious as Billy Crystal breaks silence this quickly, it signals that the emotional toll is overwhelming, and that the story is far from over. Friends close to both men have quietly admitted that Crystal had been struggling privately, replaying conversations, moments, warnings he wishes he had voiced more clearly. Regret, unspoken and heavy, hung between his words. Rob Reiner was not just a director. He was a force. A storyteller who understood human vulnerability, who built careers, who shaped modern cinema with humor that concealed profound emotional intelligence. His sudden absence leaves a vacuum that no tribute reel can fill. And Billy Crystal, perhaps more than anyone, understands that loss on a deeply personal level. What truly shocked viewers was Crystal's final remark. He paused, looked down, and said, "There are things I wish I had said sooner." He did not elaborate. He did not explain. But that sentence ignited speculation across social media and industry circles. What were those things? Warnings? Concerns? Personal regrets? Creative disagreements? Or something far more intimate, shared only between two men who trusted each other with their lives and legacies? Importantly, Crystal stopped short of feeding rumors. He emphasized respect for Reiner's family and asked for patience as facts continue to emerge. Yet the emotional honesty of his statement made it impossible to dismiss the gravity of the situation. This was not performative grief. This was a man confronting the limits of time, the cruelty of unanswered questions, and the pain of realizing that even lifelong friendships can end without closure. In Hollywood, where silence is often strategic, Billy Crystal's decision to speak now feels deliberate. Not to stir controversy, but to humanize a moment that risks being reduced to headlines and speculation. His words remind audiences that behind every shocking story is a network of real relationships, unfinished conversations, and grief that does not follow a schedule. As the industry waits for clarity, one thing is certain. Billy Crystal's voice has reframed the narrative. This is no longer just about the loss of a legendary filmmaker. It is about the cost of silence, the weight of hindsight, and the fragile line between public legacy and private pain. And for many watching, his brief statement did not provide answers. It raised questions that may linger long after the cameras move on. The shock did not fade after Billy Crystal finished speaking. In many ways, it intensified. Within minutes, industry veterans, longtime collaborators, and quiet observers began re-examining the history between Crystal and Rob Reiner, searching for context in moments that once seemed ordinary. Old interviews resurfaced. Behind-the-scenes footage was rewatched. Casual jokes exchanged years ago were suddenly parsed for meaning. Hollywood, a town built on stories, found itself trapped inside one it did not fully understand. What made Crystal's words resonate so deeply was his reputation. He is not known for impulsive remarks or emotional spectacle. Throughout his career, he has been the steady presence, the mediator, the one who kept things light when tensions rose. That is precisely why his visible restraint, and the cracks beneath it, unsettled so many people. Friends close to Crystal have since suggested that his silence until now was not avoidance, but survival. Speaking earlier would have required confronting truths he was not ready to face. Rob Reiner's death has forced that confrontation into the open. For decades, Reiner and Crystal shared more than creative success. They shared trust. In a business defined by shifting alliances, their bond was seen as unusually durable. They challenged each other artistically, defended each other publicly, and protected their private disagreements from becoming public spectacle. That mutual respect makes the current moment feel even more jarring. Sources familiar with their relationship describe a final period marked not by conflict, but by distance. Busy schedules, personal burdens, and the quiet drift that often accompanies long lives spent in the spotlight. No dramatic fallout. No public feud. Just less time, fewer calls, postponed conversations. And now, for Billy Crystal, that absence of urgency has become a source of profound regret. When Crystal said there were things he wished he had said sooner, many heard not accusation, but mourning for lost opportunity. In Hollywood, people often assume there will always be another premiere, another dinner, another chance to talk things through. Reiner's death shattered that illusion. It exposed how even the closest friendships can become victims of postponement. The public response has reflected that realization. Fans have expressed less curiosity about scandal and more empathy for the pain of unfinished dialogue. They recognize the universal fear buried in Crystal's words, the fear that silence, even when well-intentioned, can become irreversible. That fear is not unique to celebrities. It resonates because it is human. At the same time, the lack of concrete details surrounding Reiner's death has left an uncomfortable vacuum. Crystal's statement, while careful, acknowledged that discomfort without exploiting it. He did not deny the confusion. He did not attempt to control the narrative. He simply stood in the uncertainty and allowed it to exist. That choice alone distinguished his response from the usual crisis choreography Hollywood audiences have grown accustomed to. Industry analysts note that Crystal's decision to speak so soon may also reflect concern about misinformation. In an era where speculation spreads faster than facts, silence can be interpreted as indifference or concealment. By stepping forward, Crystal recentered the conversation on grief rather than rumor. He reminded people that not every story unfolds cleanly, and not every truth arrives on schedule. As tributes continue to pour in for Rob Reiner, Billy Crystal's words linger as one of the most haunting. Not because they revealed secrets, but because they exposed vulnerability. They revealed the cost of assuming time is guaranteed. They reframed the loss not as a sudden end, but as a painful interruption of conversations that should have happened earlier. Hollywood will move on, as it always does. New projects will be announced. New scandals will dominate headlines. But for those who listened closely, Billy Crystal's brief break in silence has already done something rare. It has shifted attention away from spectacle and back toward reflection. And in doing so, it has transformed Rob Reiner's death from a shocking headline into a quiet warning about the fragility of connection, and the price paid when words remain unspoken for too long. As the hours passed, the emotional weight of Billy Crystal's words continued to settle in ways no one anticipated. This was no longer just a moment of mourning confined to Hollywood insiders. It had become a mirror held up to an industry, and to a generation, that built its legacy on urgency while quietly postponing its most personal conversations. The reaction was not explosive. It was subdued, reflective, almost uncomfortable in its honesty. Several longtime colleagues of Rob Reiner have since described a man who carried more responsibility than he ever let on. To the public, Reiner was confident, outspoken, politically engaged, and creatively fearless. Privately, those close to him say he was increasingly introspective in recent years, more selective with his energy, more aware of time slipping away. These are details Billy Crystal likely understood better than most. Which is why his regret does not sound theatrical. It sounds informed. People close to Crystal suggest that the two had spoken sporadically in recent months, exchanging brief messages rather than long conversations. Nothing alarming. Nothing that would trigger intervention. And that is precisely the tragedy Crystal appears to be grappling with. There was no warning sign dramatic enough to demand immediate action. Just the slow normalization of distance, disguised as adulthood, professionalism, and mutual respect for busy lives. In Hollywood, emotional restraint is often mistaken for strength. Billy Crystal built a career on emotional intelligence, on timing, on knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. But grief has a way of reframing those instincts. His statement suggests a painful realization that discretion, while noble, can sometimes delay honesty until it is too late. That realization has struck a nerve far beyond celebrity culture. Younger actors and filmmakers have responded differently than expected. Instead of chasing conspiracy or controversy, many have openly discussed the importance of checking in, of saying difficult things early, of not assuming that success shields anyone from loneliness. In that sense, Crystal's words have sparked a rare intergenerational moment of clarity, one that strips Hollywood of its myth of emotional invincibility. What remains most striking is what Billy Crystal did not say. He did not frame himself as a hero or a victim. He did not rewrite history to appear more attentive or more present than he was. He allowed imperfection to stand uncorrected. That restraint, paradoxically, made his message more powerful. It invited others to reflect on their own silences rather than fixate on his. As for Rob Reiner's legacy, it now exists in two parallel forms. One is public and permanent, defined by films that shaped modern storytelling, careers launched, and cultural conversations sparked. The other is quieter, carried by those who knew him personally and are now confronting the sudden finality of unfinished exchanges. Billy Crystal's grief bridges those two legacies, reminding the world that behind every iconic career is a network of fragile human connections. The shock people felt was never really about revelation. It was about recognition. Recognition that even legends are vulnerable. Recognition that time does not negotiate. Recognition that the most devastating losses are often not the ones preceded by chaos, but the ones that arrive after everything seemed normal. In the coming days, there will likely be official statements, memorials, and carefully curated tributes. They will be respectful. They will be polished. But they may not capture what Billy Crystal captured in just a few restrained sentences. The ache of hindsight. The awareness that silence, even when chosen with kindness, can become a burden carried long after the chance to speak has passed. And that is why his words continue to echo. Not because they revealed what happened, but because they revealed what cannot be undone. In an industry obsessed with endings, Billy Crystal reminded everyone that the most haunting part of loss is not the final scene, but the dialogue that never made it onto the page. As the narrative continues to unfold, what becomes increasingly clear is that Billy Crystal's reaction has shifted the emotional center of this moment away from explanation and toward accountability of a different kind. Not accountability for events, but for presence. For attention. For the quiet responsibility people carry toward those they believe will always be there. In that sense, the shock surrounding Rob Reiner's death has evolved into something more enduring, a reckoning with how easily familiarity can dull urgency. Hollywood has seen public grief countless times, but rarely does it feel this restrained and this raw at once. Crystal's tone did not seek absolution. It acknowledged limitation. That distinction matters. In an industry where narratives are often rewritten to soften regret, his refusal to smooth the edges has unsettled many who recognize themselves in his hesitation. Because most people do not lose loved ones amid dramatic warnings. They lose them after ordinary days, after postponed calls, after assuming tomorrow will arrive intact. Observers have noted how Crystal's words subtly dismantle one of Hollywood's most persistent illusions, the belief that success creates insulation. That wealth, acclaim, and influence somehow extend time or soften its consequences. Reiner's passing, and Crystal's response to it, expose that belief as hollow. No schedule, no reputation, no lifetime of achievement prevents the ache of realizing something essential was left unsaid. In private conversations, several peers have reportedly reached out to Crystal not to ask questions, but to share their own versions of regret. Moments they missed. Warnings they never voiced. Gratitude they delayed. These exchanges, though unseen, suggest that this moment has already changed behavior behind the scenes. People are calling sooner. Speaking more directly. Letting go of the fear that honesty might disrupt comfort. Because the alternative, as Crystal's reflection implies, is far more devastating. What also lingers is the quiet dignity with which Crystal has handled public attention since his statement. He has not followed up with clarifications. He has not corrected interpretations. He has allowed ambiguity to remain. That choice reinforces the sense that this is not a story meant to be solved, but one meant to be felt. And perhaps learned from. In a culture addicted to conclusions, this refusal to conclude feels almost radical. Rob Reiner's name will continue to be spoken in retrospectives and tributes, his work analyzed and celebrated. Yet Billy Crystal's grief has added a human dimension that no filmography can provide. It reminds audiences that legacies are not only built through accomplishments, but through relationships that exist quietly alongside them. Relationships that require attention even when nothing appears wrong. As time moves forward, the intensity of this moment will inevitably soften. Headlines will fade. Public focus will drift. But for those who internalized Crystal's words, something subtle may endure. A willingness to interrupt routine. A recognition that silence, while comfortable, is never neutral. And that saying something difficult today is often kinder than carrying regret tomorrow. In the end, what shocked people was not what Billy Crystal revealed, but what he allowed to remain unresolved. He did not offer closure. He offered truth in its most uncomfortable form, the truth that loss does not always come with warning, and that love is sometimes measured by the courage to speak before it is too late. That may be the quiet legacy of this moment. Not scandal. Not speculation. But a reminder whispered rather than shouted, that time is not promised, that conversations are not guaranteed, and that the most meaningful words are often the ones we hesitate to say until silence takes their place. As reflection deepens, the moment begins to transcend the specifics of Billy Crystal and Rob Reiner and instead settle into something broader, almost generational. This is no longer simply about the passing of a filmmaker or the grief of a close friend. It has become an uncomfortable meditation on how people measure closeness, and how easily presence is mistaken for permanence. Crystal's restraint, once seen as professionalism, now reads as a quiet warning about the dangers of assuming that meaningful connections maintain themselves. Those who worked closely with Rob Reiner over the years describe a man who gave endlessly to others while rarely asking for attention in return. He was a mentor who preferred subtle guidance over grand gestures, a leader who made room for others to shine. That personality trait, admirable as it was, may have also masked how much he carried internally. Billy Crystal's words suggest an awareness of that imbalance, an understanding that strength often discourages intervention, even when intervention might be needed most. In many ways, Crystal's grief is not about guilt, but about recognition. Recognition that respect can sometimes look like distance. That giving someone space can quietly turn into absence. And that the line between trust and neglect is thinner than people like to admit. These realizations are difficult precisely because they challenge instincts long praised as maturity. Hollywood, for all its noise, rarely pauses to examine emotional habits this closely. Yet this moment has forced that pause. Not through scandal, but through stillness. Crystal's calm delivery, his refusal to dramatize, has compelled listeners to sit with discomfort rather than rush toward explanation. That discomfort has proven far more unsettling than outrage ever could be. The absence of definitive answers surrounding Reiner's death continues to amplify this effect. Without clear conclusions, the mind turns inward. Instead of asking what happened, people ask what they might be postponing in their own lives. Conversations delayed. Emotions edited for convenience. Words saved for a future that feels guaranteed until it is not. Crystal's reflection has become a catalyst for these private reckonings. What stands out most is how little this moment resembles traditional Hollywood mourning. There is no grand narrative arc, no redemption neatly packaged. There is only the quiet acknowledgement that some endings arrive without resolution, and that learning often comes too late to change the outcome. That honesty feels almost foreign in an industry built on controlled storytelling. As days pass, Billy Crystal has remained largely absent from the public eye. That absence feels intentional. He has said what he needed to say. Anything more might dilute the message. By stepping back, he has allowed the focus to remain on reflection rather than reaction. That choice reinforces the sense that this moment is not meant to be consumed quickly, but absorbed slowly. Rob Reiner's influence will continue to be discussed through his work, his voice, his impact on culture. But Billy Crystal's words have ensured that his passing will also be remembered as a moment that exposed something quietly universal. The truth that even strong, accomplished people can disappear from our lives without warning. And that waiting for the right moment to speak is often the same as choosing silence. In the end, the shock was never about revelation. It was about recognition. Recognition that time does not announce itself when it is running out. Recognition that love and concern require articulation, not assumption. And recognition that the most painful regrets are not born from conflict, but from comfort. Comfort that convinces people there will always be another chance, until suddenly, there is not. As the emotional aftermath settles into a quieter rhythm, the meaning of Billy Crystal's words continues to evolve. What initially felt like a moment of personal grief now reads as a subtle indictment of how modern lives, especially public ones, are structured. Time becomes fragmented. Attention becomes conditional. Relationships are sustained by assumption rather than intention. Crystal's silence, and then his decision to finally speak, exposes how easily that pattern can persist until it collapses under the weight of finality. Those closest to Crystal say he has not sought reassurance since making his statement. He has not asked to be understood or forgiven. Instead, he appears focused on honoring what remains rather than repairing what cannot be changed. That posture reinforces the authenticity of his grief. It is not performative sorrow meant to reassure an audience. It is a reckoning, quiet and unresolved, unfolding in real time. In many ways, this is why the moment continues to resonate. People are accustomed to public figures offering clarity, direction, or resolution. Crystal offered none of those. He offered uncertainty. And uncertainty, when handled honestly, can be more truthful than explanation. By admitting that there were words left unsaid, he acknowledged a universal human failure without trying to redeem it. Rob Reiner's death, viewed through this lens, becomes less about cause and circumstance and more about consequence. The consequence of deferral. Of emotional economy. Of trusting that mutual respect is enough to sustain closeness without reinforcement. Crystal's reflection suggests that even the strongest bonds require interruption of routine, deliberate presence, and sometimes uncomfortable honesty. The industry's response has quietly mirrored that realization. Private gatherings have replaced public statements. Conversations once postponed are reportedly happening now, away from cameras. There is an unspoken understanding that this moment is not about optics, but about recalibration. When someone like Billy Crystal, long seen as emotionally grounded, admits to regret rooted in silence, it destabilizes the belief that experience alone protects against these outcomes. What makes this reckoning especially powerful is its lack of urgency-driven messaging. Crystal did not urge people to act differently. He did not issue advice. He simply revealed the cost of not doing so. That absence of instruction leaves space for listeners to draw their own conclusions, which may be why the impact feels deeper and more personal. As public interest inevitably shifts, the significance of this moment may become easier to overlook. Yet its influence may persist in quieter ways. In calls made sooner. In conversations extended beyond convenience. In the recognition that silence, even when born of respect, can unintentionally become distance. These changes will not be attributed to headlines or statements. They will be invisible, private, and therefore more meaningful. Billy Crystal's words did not redefine Rob Reiner's legacy. They humanized it. They placed it within the context of shared time, missed opportunities, and the fragile assumption that there will always be more. That framing does not diminish Reiner's achievements. It deepens them by reminding audiences that greatness does not exempt anyone from the vulnerabilities of connection. Ultimately, the shock people felt was not about revelation or drama. It was about seeing a familiar figure confront something unresolved and allow it to remain unresolved. In a culture that values closure, that choice felt unsettling. But it also felt honest. And perhaps that is the lasting significance of this moment. Not the answers it failed to provide, but the awareness it sparked. Awareness that time is not an ally by default. That silence is not neutral. And that the most meaningful expressions of care are not the ones saved for reflection, but the ones spoken while there is still time to be heard. As the reflection stretches further, the moment takes on an almost philosophical weight. Billy Crystal's brief decision to speak, followed by his deliberate withdrawal, has created a space that feels rare in public discourse. It is a space without resolution, without certainty, and without the comfort of clear lessons neatly spelled out. Instead, it asks something more demanding. It asks people to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, and to recognize how often that discomfort is avoided in everyday life. What becomes evident is that Crystal's grief is not fixed in time. It is not confined to the hour he spoke or the day the news broke. It is ongoing, reshaped by memory, by hindsight, and by the slow realization that some moments only reveal their importance after they are gone. Those close to him describe a man moving carefully through his days, not seeking distraction, but allowing the weight of the loss to inform him rather than consume him. That choice, too, feels intentional. Rob Reiner's absence has amplified the silence around him. Not an empty silence, but one filled with recollection. Old stories are being told again, not for the public, but among friends who now understand that remembering is a form of responsibility. In those private exchanges, Reiner is being reconstructed not as a public figure, but as a presence. Someone who listened. Someone who challenged. Someone whose steadiness made others believe there would always be more time. Billy Crystal's words sit at the center of that reconstruction. They are not the loudest tribute, but they may be the most enduring. Because they refuse to sanctify the past. They acknowledge affection without idealization. Respect without illusion. Loss without redemption. In doing so, they preserve something essential, the truth that meaningful relationships are rarely perfect, and that imperfection does not diminish their value. This is perhaps why the moment has resonated so strongly beyond Hollywood. It touches on a fear many people carry quietly, the fear that they will one day look back and realize they mistook familiarity for permanence. That they assumed silence was understood as care. That they postponed honesty because it felt unnecessary in the moment. Crystal's reflection does not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. It simply illuminates the cost of those assumptions. As time passes, the urgency surrounding Rob Reiner's death will fade from public attention. That is inevitable. But the emotional residue of this moment may endure in subtler ways. It may surface in hesitation before postponing a call. In the impulse to speak more directly. In the decision to acknowledge concern rather than edit it away. These are not dramatic changes. They are quiet shifts, but they are often the ones that matter most. What remains striking is how little Billy Crystal attempted to control the meaning of his words. He did not frame them as a warning. He did not claim wisdom gained. He simply allowed them to exist as they were, incomplete and unresolved. That openness has invited others to attach their own experiences, their own regrets, their own unfinished conversations to the moment. In that sense, his grief has become collective, not because it was shared loudly, but because it was shared honestly. Rob Reiner's life will continue to be evaluated through the lens of his achievements, his influence, his voice. But Billy Crystal's reflection ensures that his death will also be remembered as a moment that quietly challenged how people think about time and connection. It reframed loss not as a sudden rupture, but as the final consequence of many small delays that once seemed harmless. In the end, the power of this moment lies not in what was revealed, but in what was acknowledged. That silence has weight. That waiting has consequences. And that the most painful realizations often arrive not with chaos, but with calm. Calm that comes too late to change anything, but not too late to remind others that presence, once deferred, cannot always be reclaimed.